My name is Sneh, and this is my place in Canadian history. My family established their history in their homeland, India. All my ancestors have always lived in India and experienced its rich history. My family took part in Indian independence movement. My great-grandfather had been involved in a protest with Mahatma Gandhi and went to jail with him. My grandparents were also very supportive of the movement that my grandma went on, a gold strike to support Gandhi's thinking of not wearing something that the poor didn't have. During this time, there were council meetings held between the British and the Indians at our house, and it was led by my grandfather, who was the counselor. My family played an important role in Indian independence movement, and they have marked their place in Indian history. After several years, my dad's older brother got married to a Canadian citizen and he came to Canada on a family class basis. After my uncle settled in Toronto, Ontario, he had sponsored my dad to come to Canada. This was not an easy process. My dad had to go through the point system process where they asked him questions about his education, his reasoning for choosing to go to Canada, demographic questions, and others. My dad had passed the point system process, and from this point, my place in the Canadian history officially begins. My dad's main purpose of coming to Canada was to get a better education and start a better and more secure lifestyle in Canada. Back home, my dad would have ran the family business, but coming to Canada gave my dad various opportunities. Also, my dad didn't always want to be dependent on his family, so coming to Canada allowed him to stand on his own feet and face the challenges in hope for a better lifestyle in the future. Once my dad came to Canada, there were many significant events happening. The most important one was the Charter of Rights being approved by Queen Elizabeth II. It was a very important day for Canada as it is a day that is forever remembered by Canadians, as this is the day the Canadians officially got their rights and freedom. Thanks to this day, we are able to have our basic rights and we have our freedom of speech. Another significant event that changed Canada was the Constitution Act. This gave Canada freedom from the British Parliament. When my dad came to Canada, the Constitution Act was in its final stages and was signed by Queen Elizabeth II in 1982, which was the same year he arrived in. I think my dad's footsteps were very lucky as he arrived in Canada after India was independent from the British, and once he came here, Canada also got their constitution back from the British gaining independence. The first year living in Canada was the most difficult for my dad. He faced some challenges because he needed to learn how to speak fluent English. He went to English classes to overcome this challenge, and the next challenge was to find a stable job. He started looking for jobs, and with the help of my uncle, he got a job at Toronto Star. His plan was to work hard for a few years and settle into Canada and then go back to India to get married. After several years, my dad got to experience the more exciting part of Canadian history. The Winter Olympics came to Calgary in 1988. My dad and uncle got excited and into Canadian spirit that they purchased the Canadian mugs and spent endless hours watching the Olympics. This was the first time in history that Canada has hosted the Winter Olympics and the first time my dad watched the Olympics. Just after the Olympics ended, my mom had arrived to Canada and now my parents were beginning a new journey together. His favorite sport was baseball, and during this time the Blue Jays were awesome and were flying with victory. During the 1992 World Series, my dad, mom, and uncle went to watch all the games that were played at home at the Sky Dome. My mom was pregnant with my sister at the time, so everyone said that the baby will be a great baseball player. My dad was very anxious, nervous, and excited to watch the final game, and it just happened to be that my mom went into labor. At the same time, these were two big events in my family because we had a big passion for baseball, and our favorite team was the Toronto Blue Jays, and my older sister was being born. Several years later, computers and cell phones were on their way to becoming the next big thing in technology. The internet officially came out and things were getting done faster. At the same time, owning a computer and a cell phone was a big deal because not everyone had one. When my family got their first computer, they were really happy. Many years later, the 9/11 occurred and it had changed the world of security and immigration forever. My mom had sponsored her parents a couple of years before this event, so we were lucky because their process was done with the old procedure and they just had to do a few additional immigration procedures. When they arrived in Canada, it was a very emotional day as this was the first time out of their homeland, India. 9/11, the war against terror began in Afghanistan. Canada played an important role in this because they went there as peacekeepers. Canada became a peacekeeping country after Prime Minister Lester B. Pearson got the Nobel Peace Prize for creating the UN peacekeeping force. Ever since then, Canada has been a peacekeeping country during this period. It was scary because there were threats of other terror attacks in the other countries, and we were very scared that it would happen to the CN Tower, which is not that far from us. My dad was the first generation to come to Canada to begin our place in Canadian history. There were a great number of significant events that took place, and I am happy to have my parents to teach me about their place in Canadian history. As the second generation living in Canada, I wish to continue to live here and pass down my family place in Canadian history for many generations to come.